Hello and welcome. Let me tell you a little bit about my friend who is joining me today. Eric Goldman is an adjunct associate professor of cinema at Yeshiva University. He is also founder and president of Ergo Media, a New Jersey-based film distribution company specializing in Jewish cinema. Dr. Goldman is also film reviewer for North New Jersey's The Jewish Standard. He is a known scholar and lecturer in Yiddish, Israeli, and Jewish film, and a noted film educator. He is former director of the Jewish Media Service, which was a national clearinghouse on film and television for the North American Jewish community, and was curator of film for the YIVO Institute for Jewish Research. He has also curated several Jewish film festivals, including the Ring Family Israel Film Series at Yeshiva University in spring 2012. And wow, I didn't even need my glasses to read that. So welcome, Eric.
It's great to be with you, Mike.
Thank you. Where are you joining me from?
Teaneck, New Jersey.
And you've been there, you've lived there for quite a while.
When we left the city, when my oldest was born, there was just no room and we couldn't afford, to jump up to that 2 or 3 bedroom. Actually, we could because we were hoping to get into one, but of course that building got sold. So here we are in New Jersey ever since.
Oh, wow. My sister lives in New Jersey, I guess not far from you. She lives in Westfield.
Well, it's not too bad. It's a great town.
Yeah. And the library, these Zoom meetings that have been so prevalent now since we're recording this during the almost the end of July 2020 epidemic. And you see so many libraries, even when people are on television behind them, everybody's got a library, but yours is unique because that is a film library, if I'm not mistaken.
Film book library, yeah. That I've accumulated and that, of course, none of my kids want. So I enjoy it and I use it for my research.
That's interesting. What's happening with DVDs? Are we headed to are they going to become extinct because everybody now downloads films and streams stuff? What is that the direction it's going in?
I think it depends on your age. If you're over the age of 40, 45, some people just, in that age bracket like to have a DVD on the shelf that they just pull off and they stick in their DVD player. But a lot of people are getting rid of their DVD players, and what do I need to keep that for? It's just taking up space, and everything's up in the cloud. If you want it, you rent it. You want to see it again, you rent it again.
Assuming the over 45 or 55 are computer literate or iPhone literate to be able to do those things. But I don't know. I haven't reached that age yet, so I wouldn't know about that.
Just 45?
Well, I think maybe I forgot. You know what happens when you age, when you get older? It's the old story. Two things happen when you get older. You know what they are, Eric?
I'm guessing.
Okay, the first thing is you forget. That's the first thing. And the second thing is I forgot what the second thing is. Well, gosh, I not that long ago, we used to go to Blockbuster and all those little, mom and pop video stores that started out with the VHS. And what I'm doing now is I am digitizing all my, hundreds of video cassettes, the old cassettes, and so that my grandkids won't have to be bothered with trying to find a VHS player.
Yeah, the problem is, will your grandkids even want to have that material? I don't know if you're digitizing it and putting it onto discs. I think you're in trouble. If you're digitizing it and putting it on the computer, that'll work.
Yeah, I'm doing it on MP3 or MP4, and hopefully, I'm hoping that they will want to remember grandpa or great grandpa. And most of my other stuff is going to go to my parents, may they rest in peace, Pesach and Lily, and my parents' archives are at the Widener Library at the Judaica department at Harvard, and that's probably where I'll send my stuff as well. So let's first of all let's talk about our friendship, which is goes back quite a while. When, I'm trying to remember when we first met.
Mike, one of the things about you, and I watched one of your other friends' discussions, and you don't pat yourself enough on the back. You mentioned it in passing, and I think one of your friends also. You've always been willing to help, and that's the first time I think you and I met and spent some time together. I was working for the Jewish community. We were putting together a kids' Hanukkah program. And I reached out to Mike Burston. I said, you know what, Mike, could you give us some help? We want to put together this program. We want to put it on television in Chicago and then make it available to the North American Jewish community. And there you were. I mean, so many other actors, artists have said, I'm too busy, or how much is it going to, how much are you paying me? And we had a very limited budget. It was for the Jewish television station in Chicago at the time. And you got on a plane, and it's funny, when I still remember when you got on the plane, because who was on the plane but Cy Coleman? And he walked over to you and he gave a big hug. Mike, what are you doing here? And you said, well, I'm going to be doing a Jewish children's program for Hanukkah. And Cy went, yes, Mike, good for you.
God, Eric, God bless you. I've been on so many planes in my lifetime that I guess I don't remember that. But
that's what happens when you turn 45, Mike. You forget.
Yes. And you're sure that was me, right? That was me. That wasn't the other Kunilemo.
Oh, because wow, Cy Coleman. I mean, that's yeah.
So that obviously was after I did Barnum.
Yeah.
Right. So that was in probably the mid '80s.
It was.
Yeah.
And then our paths have crossed over the years. You have to understand, my wife is a Mike Burston groupie. So whenever you're on Broadway, or you're doing an off-Broadway show, or you're doing a Folksbiene show or a Yiddish, there we are. And to this day, somewhere I have a ticket to the show you did. What was it called at the time? I'm trying to remember. It was Ain't Broadway Grand.
Oh gosh, yeah.
We had tickets to the show. And
yeah.
Unfortunately, it never made it to us. But wow, it's been wonderful. And the incredible thing is that, I don't know if you remember this, but I was doing a class camp or something, and your mom was there, and I dragged along my wife's mother, Faggy, and we were sitting at the table together, and Faggy and your mom, may she rest in peace, just hit it off, just really, and they became good friends. And my mother-in-law was in Montreal at the time, and they would get on the phone and chat with each other. And when my mother-in-law came here, your mother schlepped out from the Lower East Side to join us out in New Jersey for dinner. And it was a beautiful, beautiful relationship.
Now that I remember very well, because, and especially Faggy, which is such a unique, beautiful Yiddish name. I do remember that. But you're talking about Ain't Broadway Grand, that was in 1993. And it wasn't a bad show. Did you get to see it, or you just have the ticket?
We were about a week short.
Oh.
Never got.
Okay. Well, I'll sing you a couple of songs later. No, it was a pretty good musical about the life of Mike Todd, and it was composed by the same composer who did Man of La Mancha, and so it had a good pedigree. But unfortunately, the New York Times didn't like us. It was Frank Rich at the time, and he gave us a bad review. And at that time, as I guess nowadays as well, if you got killed by the New York Times, you didn't survive. And it's a shame. I was above the marquee. My name was up there above the
You
title.
were Mike
Yeah,
Top.
yeah, I was, and it was a good musical, but c'est la vie, as they say. Um,
Broadway's
I
great.
I
Uh,
want to talk a little bit about you, not about me. Uh, there was a very famous Israeli actor who was famous for, buttonholing young actors after a show and talking about himself for half an hour, for an hour, and the poor kids couldn't get away. And one day he had this kid after about 45 minutes. He said, I've been talking about myself all along, and I didn't realize we should talk about you. Tell me, did you ever see me do Hamlet?
no, that's
and
what
that was about
he
and that was about the kid.
he would walk over to everybody and say, "Have you ever done
So
Hamlet? Mike,
sorry.
have you ever done Hamlet? Maybe in Yiddish."
No, there are some things that you have to know what your calling, I guess you can say, is, and my calling is not to play Hamlet. What I would like to do at some point, you have to be realistic and go, with your age. In the Yiddish theater, as you well know, the aging performers, they never wanted in the union. We had the Hebrew Actors Union in New York. They were afraid of young blood, and so they kept playing young brides and grooms into their 60s and 70s. And I you know I can't do that. What I would like to do someday is, for example, I'd like to play Willie Loman in Death of a Salesman, that kind of thing. So but no, Hamlet, I think I've passed that by.
Yeah,
But I want to talk, Eric, about you and
okay.
what you have accomplished in your career, and what you're doing lately, which is fascinating. Your program on JBS, Jewish Broadcast Service. The program is called,
Jewish Cinematheque.
right, and it's fascinating because I don't think there's anyone today that has the knowledge that you have, and the expertise on quote unquote Jewish cinema, Israeli cinema, cinema that has to somehow to reflect the Jewish experience. So, can you talk a little bit about the program?
Yeah, it's interesting because um, I was a graduate student in film, interested in either film history or film production, and I was in Boston, and a friend of mine at Harvard said, "Why don't you come on over? They're showing this Yiddish movie." And I said, "What is that?" And he said, "Well, it's called The Dybbuk." And I went over and I watched it, and I said, "Wow, that was fantastic." And I went over to the library. We didn't have the internet at the time, and I looked up the Dybbuk in some of the film books, and I looked in my own library at the time, and nothing. Finally, in a French film history book, I found a paragraph about Yiddish cinema, and I said, "Well, I want to know more." And that really drove me, and I decided to write my graduate school dissertation, my doctoral dissertation on Yiddish cinema, because nobody else had. And that was my entrance into that particular world. And I was fortunate at the time to become friendly with a man named David Mattis, who was the acting editor at the Forwards, at the Jewish Daily Forward, because the editor had left and David was filling in, but David had also been the film critic for many years. So David was just, he was my companion for the next 3-4 years as I dug into the archives and I researched and I sat down with many of the great actors of the Yiddish stage. You talk about older people wanting to play younger parts. Jacob Ben-Ami, may he rest in peace, one of the great directors and actors of the Yiddish stage.
Yeah.
He wanted to play, people in his 20s. He was in his 50s and his 60s. Didn't matter to Jacob. And when it came to going out and making a movie, they said to him, it won't work. Maybe you can do it on stage, but you can't do it any other way. So when you spoke about the Hebrew Actors Union, I remember going in there and interviewing Miriam Crescent, may she rest in peace, and all of these great people. You had the opportunity to be on stage with many of them, and they were so great and so underappreciated. So that sort of was the cornerstone of my early entrance into the world of Yiddish and into the world of cinema and cinema history. And
we'll continue with that for a second, just to not to digress. You mentioned two things. Ben Ami, who I knew all these people. I was very fortunate in that I was born basically into that on 2nd Avenue, which was the Jewish Rialto, the Jewish Broadway, and all those great stars of the Yeshiva. They were like aunts and uncles of mine. Ben Ami and Bertha Gersten, who, interestingly enough, they were both married to other people, but they had this love affair going their entire life. It was very, it was the best kept secret among the Yiddish actors. But I'm kind of like that link between that generation, that I was actually able to know them personally and experience them. And I'm that link to today's generation to try and, keep their memories alive. But for example, when in 1947, when they filmed the biography of Al Jolson, and Jolie wanted to play himself, obviously. I mean,
talking about the Jolson story.
The Jolson story. And he even auditioned for it. He agreed to do an audition. He was in his late 50s. He wasn't that old. And you can actually see that audition. It's available. And it hurts to watch, because obviously they said, Jolie, you're the greatest, and it's about you. But sorry, but we can't, you can't play it yourself. And so it was, oh gosh, you'll remind me who played Jolson.
Larry Parks.
Larry Parks, right. So that happened not just in the Yiddish theater or in the Yiddish cinema. And then I remember working as a kid with Maury Schwartz, the great Maury Schwartz. And when you were lucky enough to have some great film of his, the film about Tevye, and so you can see what great artists we had in the Yiddish theater. And then all those films that were made just before the Second World War, the one with Molly Pecan. So, it's something that I am so grateful that you are continuing to make people aware. Otherwise, they would all be gone. It would be a memory, and they're all right now at the Hebrew Actors Union, the Alliance Cemetery out in Long Island. Every time I want to see all my old aunts and uncles, I got to go visit over there.
It was a beautiful chapter in my life, working with some of these people, getting to know Joseph Green, who had made really 4 of these wonderful films in Poland, including Yidel, Mitten Fiddle, with Molly Pekin, Mamala with Molly, and with Bertha Gersten, Abrivale der Mamet. And I worked with Joe actually in restoring 2 of his films because they were crumbling. Nobody really cared about them. And I couldn't even get to watch them. I had to go sometimes to a senior center out in Queens because somebody was showing it on 16 millimeter, and it was a terrible print. And fortunately, many of those films have now been preserved. So that was a great, wonderful chapter in my life, and getting to know Joe, and we became good friends. We would meet for pastrami, 3 times a year. And just special, special people. And one of them, even though your mom really never made a film per se, but your mom and dad. Fortunately, I had a chance to get to know your mom. Never, I didn't get a chance to meet Pesach.
I have a photo that you sent me, and I'm so grateful because I was looking for it, of us in 2000, the year 2000. My mom is there. It was a a special screening of the Comediant, the documentary about my family, and I'll put that picture up. Asi Dayan was there also at this gathering, and you're there. My mom, myself, Siona, my wife, Asi's wife. Uh,
At the
great,
time.
at the time, yeah, great memories. And speaking of Molly, God bless her, I believe that the reason that Norman Jewison cast her as Yenta in the film version of Fiddler was because he saw a screening of Yiddle Fiddle, if I'm not mistaken. Is that correct?
I don't know about that, but I can tell you another story about Molly and somebody going and seeing a screening, and in particular Yiddle Mitten Fiddle. I was working at the Jewish community at the time after I graduated, and we got a call from Barbara Streisand's office. She would like to meet with Joseph Green. Joseph Green had made a film, Yiddle Mitten Fiddle, and what's the film about? It's about a young woman who is a klezmer musician, but who masquerades, becomes a boy so that she could roam the countryside. So Streisand wanted to meet Joe. They wanted to talk about what it was like to portray a man as a woman on screen in preparation for Yentl. And it happened. She watched Yiddle Mitten Fiddle. I was not invited to that screening, but so these kinds of things happen. Molly was supposed to, she had agreed to host my book launch at the 92nd Street Y. And that morning, there was a major, major, major snowstorm. And so Molly never made it, but Joe Green came in and took over as the host. And she was another incredible, incredible lady. I saw her at age 80 doing somersaults on stage.
Cartwheels. She used to do cartwheels.
Cartwheels.
Yes. Unfortunately, as she got a little older, she got dementia. And the last time I saw her was at a gathering. Her sister took good care of her after Yankel, her husband, passed away. And her sister brought her to this dinner. And it was very rare because she realized that she couldn't remember people, and it was embarrassing to her. So she went out very rarely, but she was one of the unique greats from a very early age. And by the way, these Yiddish films, are they available for if people want to watch them? I know that the center, Aaron Lansky Center, I believe, has some of them that are available there.
Aaron has some. There's a group in Boston at the National Center for Jewish Film. My company, actually, Ergo Media, put out a bunch of these on DVD. There's even now a French company that's done some restoration of some of the classic Yiddish movies. So they're getting around, and fortunately, and hopefully at some point, they'll be streamed. That has not yet happened, but that's where the future goes.
I'll put up the link to Ergo Media so people can see that, and that's interesting. You know, why does somebody create a streaming service just for Yiddish films? That would be a great idea.
There's talk of it, and I think the copyright issues are often very complex. I know that when I worked with Joe in clearing rights, sometimes it got complicated and problematic because rights weren't necessarily recopyrighted and they reverted. It became a legal nightmare. But some of those films are still around. Mike, I think you were, if I remember correctly, you were in the remake of the Dybbuk in Hebrew in Israel.
That's right. And that was in the late, I believe it's 1969,
On the
around that time.
you know,
And this was a German-Israeli co-production for German television. And it was directed by Ilan Eldad, friend of mine in Israel, an Israeli director. And it included some of the great actors of Habima, many of. They brought for the female lead, they brought a German actress, and even brought over Dudla Patasha, David Apatasha, was brought over to play the rabbi, and I played the bridegroom that was brought in for her.
you were coming. You were
Yes,
coming.
I was on in, and gosh, you know what? I have some clips of that. I think I do have some clips. I wonder whether it's available. But yes, it was done, and gosh, I don't even know whether it was distributed in Israel. It was mostly uh, it was mostly for the German market.
Yeah.
But which brings me to a little discussion I'd like to have with you about the Israeli film industry. That I was very fortunate to be one of the founding fathers of the modern Israeli film industry back in 1964. My first film was Salah Shabati, Salah with Topo. But I'd like you to give us a little, insight, and that's what your program does so beautifully now on the state of the Israeli cinema. Obviously, right now we are in the middle of a pandemic, and it's getting pretty bad in Israel. It keeps going up and down. How, by the way, how are you doing? How are you coping? You and the family?
We're, New Jersey 2 months ago was a horror. We were in the epicenter, Bergen County, New Jersey, horrible. And now, we're one of the, whatever it is, 9 states where it just keeps going down. And hopefully that will be the case. We have a great governor. He's doing all the right things and phasing everything in. So we're very fortunate in that way. New York City also.
So talk a little bit about how you see Israeli cinema, because that's, actually a mirror. I consider it a mirror into Israeli society. And over the last few decades, it's changed so drastically from what they kind of negatively used to call the burekas, the populist films, to one of the finest examples of cinema, international cinema today.
It's funny. After I really did all of my work and released my book, my book was, when Yiddish Cinema was published, I began working in the Jewish community, doing a bunch of outreach and helping communities develop their media capabilities. And then subsequent to that, I focused on the American Jewish experience through film. But for I guess, really from that time in graduate school, when I did one of my comprehensive exams on Israeli cinema has been, a part of me. And the research that I'm now doing actually is on Israeli cinema and how it reflects Israeli society. I can't help but tell the story. I did a series at the 92nd Street Y for 10 years on Israeli cinema. We would invite filmmakers and sociologists and producers and artists and so on and so forth to come talk in connection with, after post-screening. We were showing Salah, and Kishon had flown in to be part of the discussion, Ephraim Kishon, who was the director of that film. And I'm watching it and I see, a car pull up. They were at the JNF Forest. It's one of the classic moments in the film. And they're putting up a sign, and the JNF guy, the Jewish National Fund guy, puts it up, introduces himself to some tourists who come in. And I'm looking at the guy and I'm saying, he looks awfully familiar. And getting out of the car, it's this young kid with a Brooklyn accent. It was bursted.
Yes, it was. And by the way,
And you're
after we left, I played I had a Jewish American mother. We came from the United States as tourists in the film, and then when we left, Salah turns that sign around, or he changes the sign with the name of another American Jewish family, and a car pulls up, and that is my father, my mother, and my sister also played in that film. So that was my first film. That was just before Kunilemo, 1964, and 65 we shot Kunilemo, and the rest is history. I've been Kunilemo ever since.
And of course, your sister screams, "Where is that driver?"
Yes.
But yeah, so Israeli cinema began. It was not a high priority for the government of Israel in the early years. Talking about birth of the state in the 50s. A lot of productions, people actually came in from outside of the country. The big early film in the 1950s, Hill 24 Doesn't Answer, was actually produced with British money and directed by a British director. They didn't have the talent. And then in the 60s, with a film like Sala and the Kunilemo films, and you made 3 of them, there was slowly the beginning of a film industry, but with very little support from the government. So unfortunately, filmmakers would make a film and then wait 6, 7, 8 years before the next film could be made because they wouldn't be able to raise the money. There wasn't enough of a demand. Israelis typically didn't want to see Israeli films. They wanted to go see American films. One of my favorite stories is a friend of mine had a film being shown in Tel Aviv. I was spending some time in Jerusalem, and so I came to Tel Aviv, and I was waiting outside of the theater. It was a duplex. There were 2 theaters inside, and I, like a good, dutiful American guy, I got in line, and I'm standing there, and I'm waiting, and I'm waiting, and I'm starting to chat with the people in front of me. So, you like this new Israeli film? And they looked at me and said, "What Israeli film?" And I said, "Well, I'm waiting in line to see." And they said, "No, no, no, this is the line for Rambo. You want to go to the Israeli film? It's over there." And of course, there were 7 people in the theater. But as you said, an amazing thing happened. And it largely happened because the government finally realized that it was good to put money into Israeli culture, and particularly into Israeli cinema. A film called Beyond the Walls actually got world attention. And Warner Brothers, as part of the arrangement with the Israeli government, created a fund to help Israeli filmmakers. And that fund blossomed, and then there became another fund when the Knesset finally realized that this is good for the country. We are putting Israel out there. But of course, a lot of the films are left-oriented, and some people in the government are not particularly thrilled with that. I was at a press conference once with Ariel Sharon, who at the time was the minister in charge of giving the funding for films. I think it was Minister of, it was strange. It was like Minister of Tourism, but they somehow controlled the money for films. And somebody said to him, Minister Sharon, why are you giving money for these films that are, basically take a hard look at Israel? And he looked at the audience, to his credit, and he said, we are a democracy, and we give films to the best proposals, no matter what the subject matter. And unfortunately, these days, that's getting a little bit more complicated. But
it's more a reflection of the generation that has been growing up over the last few decades, going to the schools, the schools that we have to learn the craft, writers, directors, cinematographers, watching and learning from overseas, from Europe, and they are reflecting the culture of the country right now. And as you say, we have a free society, and the only, we've had several films. How many have been already nominated for the Oscar? Haven't won yet. But the only caveat, I guess, for me is when you're kind of washing your dirty laundry in public, there should be self limits on that, because after all, you are you are showing our society to the rest of the world, and we have enough enemies without causing the damage ourselves. But again, that's why Israel is the only democracy in the entire Middle East. So it's a balancing act. But I think we need to be responsible. I tried that in my directorial debut 3 years ago, uh, to deal with a very delicate subject as well. As you know, I think you've seen it. It was a story that I've kept since I served in the Six-Day War. And 3 years ago, we knew we were going to commemorate the 50th commemoration of the war. And I dug that story out of my drawer, and I said, this is the right time to do it. And I've been waiting for the right project to direct. Although all my films, with my dear director Yoel Zilberg, I was always there and helping. So I knew the profession and the technical end of it. But when I decided to do this film, it's about an Egyptian and Israeli soldier who meet at the end of the war. I knew it would be controversial, but I also knew that the end of the story would be something that gave some hope. It was a hopeful message. The film is called Azimuth. I think you've seen it.
So what you've done, I mean, here you are, as you said, you were one of the founding fathers in terms of your participation as an actor early on in the 60s. And what you've done is just what is an example of what's going on in Israel, where talent, some of whom have been actors, are now going forward and writing screenplays and directing films. And I must tell you, I've spoken to a number of actors who've decided to take that plunge into direction, and it is no easy task. And,
No.
and you can lose your shirt, and you give up a lot of time. And Mike, I love the film, by the way, and all the credit to you, because that film tackles a subject which is not all that popular, and that is you see the interaction between an Israeli soldier and an Egyptian soldier. That was done 25, 30 years ago with a film called Avanti Popolo, and at the time people were not interested, and now it's considered to be one of the great classics. So I'm hopeful that in the case of Azimuth, is it Azimuth in Hebrew?
Azimuth, actually, or azimuth. And azimuth, strangely enough, the root of the word is Arabic, azimuth, and it means where two points meet on a map. The azimuth is where two points meet, and that's kind of um, a message that the film has, that if we don't meet, and not just meet, but we have to somehow cooperate. And if we don't, it's not just between the Egyptian and the Israeli, or the Palestinian and the Israeli, but it's happening all over the world. If it's between the Pakistanis and the Indians, or the Serbs and the Bosnians, it's a message that resonates anywhere, and you have to compromise, which is the most important word here. If we don't compromise, we'll never make it together.
But the acting that you brought out on the part of those two actors, incredible, just really wonderful, and it's it was really a tour de force. So all the credit to you.
My sorry, my actor, the Egyptian, is played by an Egyptian American actor, Sammy Sheikh. He's wonderful. And he told me that his previous film just before this one was American Sniper. And he gave me the greatest compliment. He said, since I worked with, oh gosh, that's now I'm having a senior moment with Clint Eastwood. He said, because you come from the acting profession, you know, I think actors can ultimately be the best directors because we know how we would like to be treated as by a director. And it's all about how you approach the actors as a director. And I know how I'd like to be treated. And I realized that I needed really two other elements if I was going to direct a film. The casting and the cinematographer and the editor. And if you put that package together, the job of a director is to just sit back and let them do their job. Don't interfere. And that was my biggest lesson, you know.
You're
And it
not
works.
you're not giving yourself enough credit. You know, you're right. An actor's director is unique. My favorite actor's director was Sidney Lumet, who actually grew up as a young actor in the Yiddish theater. His father, Baruch Lumet, was a Yiddish actor. But Sidney had a sensitivity as an actor to working with actors, and all the credit to you for that.
Thank you. Thank you. And so let's just repeat the program that you're doing and where people can see it. It's on JBS, right?
Yeah, so what I wanted to do, very much like what you want to do, you know, you're having coffee with friends, chat with friends, which is phenomenal. There are so many wonderful actors, directors, writers of Jewish subjects, whether they're Hungarian or Romanian or French or American or Israeli. And they often will come into New York, and we grab them when they have a new film and have a chance to talk with them. And as someone who has studied film history, how often do I want to reach and see an interview with someone? And a lot of those oral histories were never done. So I'm doing this because I think it's of interest. You know, these are films that I think are of interest to people. With streaming now, they're much more accessible, even during this crazy time. So the program serves not only as an opportunity for an audience to see and meet these film people, but it's also a record for the future. So it's on the Jewish Broadcasting Service, which is all across the United States. It's available. They put all of their previous programs up on their website, so you can actually go to jbstv.org and access any of the programs that were previously recorded. And when they are broadcast on cable, they're also available to be streamed. So for instance, sometimes I'll take my laptop downstairs and I'll just, you know, put it onto my TV screen with the new technology and watch it live if I can't necessarily find it on my TV stations.
And now you're doing it, obviously. Can you still go into the studio, or are you doing it like we're doing this via
We are
Zoom?
doing it on Zoom. So
On Zoom.
just a couple of weeks ago, I had Donnie, your buddy, Donnie Messing, who had made a great documentary called Alsi.
Donnie Menken.
Menken.
Menken, right.
There's also a singer.
Yes.
And Donnie Menken, and he's adorable. He's just, you know, you just want to hug him virtually. And he made a great film about Alsi Perry, who was an African-American basketball player who just missed playing for the Knicks and came to Israel and became the great star of Tel Aviv Maccabi. And they went on to win the European Championship, beating Russia. But Alsi had a story. So it was great to hear Donnie talk about that experience and to show clips from the film. And that's what we do. And we do it by Zoom.
Well, if we want to zoom the other way, you're zooming with me. Maybe someday I'll zoom with you.
Well, I'm hopeful that we can finally talk Mike Burston to come on to Jewish Cinematheque. And we're going to make a shidduch and we're going to have you on. I want to talk not only about Azimut, but about Kuni Lemel and Herschela and Mr. Money and the Dybbuk, and we can go on and on and on. Mike, there's so much. I just want to tell one cute story. As a kid, my parents gave money to, I think it was Israel Bonds. I grew up in Philadelphia. And one day they came home and they said, you know, we just saw the most amazing play, the Megillah of Itzik Munger. And these great actors were in it. And who were they? They were the Bursteins. And later on in life, it sort of clicked. I said, well, that was Mike as a kid. You were actually in that show. We're talking about the late 50s.
Well, I wasn't a kid. My son had just been born, Peter. It was 1969.
Was it that late?
We was the first Israeli musical to come to Broadway, and it was in Yiddish. It was the great poet Itzik Munger's poetry, set to music by Dubi Zeltzer, and it revolutionized the Israeli theatrical scene because Yiddish, up until then, was looked upon very, very negatively by the leaders of the country. They wanted to establish Hebrew as a national language. In 1965, 3-4 Sabras, well, almost Sabras, born in Russia, Chaim Hefer, Dan Ben Amotz, Yankele Agmon, decided to produce a musical based on Munger in Yiddish, with us, the Burstein family, and Hebrew translation by Chaim Hefer, narration. And then it was brought to Broadway with English narration. And we then toured with it. And we came to Philadelphia, 1969. I believe we were at the Forest Theater in Philadelphia. And that's really, we'll talk about it when I'm on your show eventually. That's how I got to be Kuni Lemel, because I was 23 at the time, 22 or 23, and the producer of the Kuni Lemel, no, that was 1965, I was 20. And the producer and director of Kuni Lemel, Mordechai Navon, the famous head of Geva Studios in Israel, who established the film industry in Israel, the newsreel, that was his, and Israel Becker, who directed Kuni Lemel, they came to see the Megillah in Israel because they heard that there was this young actor and they were looking for an actor that could portray both characters in the film, both Kuni Lemel and the other leading man. And they saw me in it. And my father, during the intermission, he met with Mr. Navon, came backstage, and my father said, hey, wait, you'll see him in the second act. He's even better. And Navon said, I want to see him as Kuni Lemel. And my father, at that moment, he knew that I had the part. So that, for me, changed my life. You know, it kind of like what happened to Dustin Hoffman after the Graduate. That's what happened to me in Israel in 1966 when the film was released. But that was me in the Megillah of Itzik Munger. Yeah.
The difference was that Dustin Hoffman was not the first choice. You were.
Yes, although there's an interesting story in there. Menachem Golan, may he rest in peace, who again was one of the great pioneers of Israeli popular cinema, as you well know, when he heard that Navon was about to do a film version of Kuni Lemel, he said, you know what, I'll do one as well. He wanted to grab that, that first try at producing a musical of Kunilemo, and he was going to hire Ili Gorlitsky to play Kunilemo. And then there started a kind of a war between Navon and Golan, who would be the first one to succeed and finance this. This was the first Israeli film in CinemaScope, Technicolor. We brought in technicians, the uh, uh, director of photography from Italy, the lighting people from Italy, the sound people, because we didn't have that, the cameras, it was in CinemaScope. And actually, the camera operator on that film was Adam Greenberg, who
Wow.
eventually moved to the United States. He's still here, God bless him, he's retired. But he made a name for himself as one of the greatest directors of photography. Terminator, that was Adam Greenberg. Anyway, make a long story short, Menachem did it just for the publicity because Navon had the means to finance this film and he didn't. And so that fell by the wayside, and I got to do the film. But we got a lot to talk about, Eric, and we will. But before I let you go, I always ask my friends a question, and I want to see if you can give me your answer. If I were to ask you, who would have been the individual that inspired your life? A person that inspired your life, who would it be?
So professionally, I would say Joseph Green, the great Yiddish director, because what he did was just incredible. Going back to Poland, where he had grown up, and making 4 Yiddish films in the pre-war years, 36, 37, 38, and just incredible. Personally, I imagine that many of your guests would say the same thing. My dad. My dad was a guy who was committed to teaching the Hebrew language. Had he not grown up in the Depression, I think he would have been a rabbi. I think that's what he wanted, but family couldn't afford that. And he became an educator, both secular math educator and also a Hebrew educator. The interesting thing is that growing up, my grandfather would, I would sit on my grandfather's lap and I would ask, "Grandfather, Zeta, teach me a little Yiddish." Because my parents would only speak like most people of my generation, so that I wouldn't understand. And my father would say, "Don't waste your time. Don't waste your time. Learn Hebrew. Yiddish is not an important subject to learn." And fortunately, I had the opportunity to study Yiddish late in life, when I was in graduate school at the YIVO Institute. So, my father wasn't always 100% right, but his values were correct. He always said, go straight, commit yourself to Jewish life, and do what you love to do. And that's what I'm doing now.
And how fortunate we are, because my hero also was my father, and I've heard that from several of my friends when I asked that question. We're so lucky to have had them, and hopefully we become our parents at some point. So we'll pass it on. Thanks so much. I appreciate it, Eric. It was a delight.
Mike. Thank you.
And thank you, folks, for watching again. And I leave you again with my motto: Carpe diem, seize the day. Thank you so much for joining us. And, we'll see you next time. Shalom.